Hello and welcome to Writing with Interactive Word Walls. My name is Wade Wilshusen and I'm going to be guiding you through this virtual training session here today. The audience is for all K through 5 elementary educators, including writing teachers, teachers of ELLs, dual language teachers, really anyone that interacts with students who need to expand their academic vocabulary. And that pretty much includes everybody out there. Because as you know, all students are English language learners when it comes to our specialized academic vocabulary. And this is true. We really all are language teachers. In every classroom, we're going to be probably the greatest model of academic language that our students encounter. So it's up to us to do the very best we can. The objective for today is to review the steps it takes to build these interactive word walls. And then we're going to use language and context, graphic organizers, and sentence frames to produce quality expository writing, which we know in fourth and seventh grade is tested, but it's got to be built. That expository writing has to be built in every single grade level for our kids to be successful. So we want to look briefly at the timeline. We'll be setting the purpose to begin with. Then we're going to look at word walls versus interactive word walls. What is the difference? Why is one better than the other? We'll spend a little bit of time building and planning interactive word walls. Then we'll be demonstrating TPR, or total physical response, and how to use those sentence stems. And then at the end, we'll have some time for question and answers and closure. Word walls, the traditional sort, versus interactive word walls. Here you have a traditional word wall. What do you notice and what do you wonder about what you see here? If you have someone next to you, turn and talk about these questions. If you don't, you can take some notes, take some time to reflect and look here. This would be a good time if you have a group to pause it and discuss what you see here. So here are some questions that might guide your conversation. Again, if you're with the group, it might be nice to pause this after each one of these questions and get a consensus. Or if you're working by yourself, these are some questions you might want to write down the answers to so you can share this out later with your team. But here are the things I was curious about. Is there a rule for the color coding? It seems that the background color on the paper is pretty random. What is the logic to the arrangement? Clearly, these are alphabetized. But for what reason are they alphabetized? What purpose does that serve the student to have these in alphabetical order? Is it meant to serve as a dictionary for frequently misspelled words? Are these sight words? Are these words that students generated on their own? Or did they come from a list mandated by the district? How are the words selected? And finally, what is the content area topic of the word wall? If you look at this word wall, can you tell what kind of class we're in? So these traditional word walls definitely have their drawbacks. They're teacher generated here clearly because they're all printed out on computer. They've all been laminated and cut, and they're displayed in a way that shows students that this is definitely the product of the teacher and not something that they interact with. It's static, meaning it's not going to change. These words are posted up there, and because they're in alphabetical order, they're going to be moved around and rearranged by someone who has that kind of linguistic authority. No logic to the organization. If you look here, her and him, okay, that makes sense, her and him. But then we have his and hit. So her is on the side that his might be. You thought maybe it was going to be a gender situation, but really it's just in service of the alphabetization, I believe. And there is no visual support. The colors do not have any correspondence to the word. The layout of the words has no visual organization, and there are no pictures of any sort. So that really is not the most helpful thing for a student. But I want to caution that this is a starting point. So even if this is what your word wall looks like, you have started somewhere. You are definitely doing something to foster word consciousness in your classroom, and that's a positive. That is a positive, definitely. So take this time now to self reflect or to turn and talk with the people with you. Are these traditional word walls the type of word walls you're currently using in your classroom? And if so, what kinds of advantages and disadvantages have you seen while implementing them? Now, here you have an interactive word wall Powtoon that Dr. Julie Jackson made. And this is when I stop and give credit to Dr. Jackson. All of this interactive word wall research is based on her work that she did for a long time and proved that it was very effective, not only for ELLs, but every student, and that these word walls increase student achievement and much more, as we'll get into in a minute. But take this time now. This video is 8 minutes long. Watch that with your group or by yourself. Now that you've seen the video, I want to show some more examples because that video, while it does a great job of introducing the concept of interactive word walls, it breezes through some of those visual examples. And I think it's very important that you see that these can be used in multiple contexts across curriculum and in various grade levels. So here we have sound energy, science K6A, kindergarten kids using their 5 different senses to explore different forms of energy. And you can see these are definitely student generated. And this is going to mean a lot to a kid because he has ownership over that piece of his classroom. And it's his sound effects that this dog is making here. It's his sound effect that this car is making. These little action lines are their creation. So that ownership that the student has is very powerful in a classroom. Here's first grade science. Forms of energy, a little bit more sophisticated. You can see our good old Venn diagram here with the 3 different kinds. And you can see down here some very nice sentence stems. It's a great one. Then you go to second grade, and we're looking at language arts now. This is looking at the different genres, folktale, fairy tale, legend, fable. And then down here, they're talking about evidence to support their conclusions. So they have to draw on setting, character, events, and the lesson they get from the story. And this is beautifully organized into a data table. Now in math, ways to show a number, place value. You can see expanded notation, expanded form. This is third grade. You see it's getting a little bit more sophisticated. And students have obviously taken a chance to share their thoughts with sticky notes that they come up. The great thing about this is they can put it up there. And if they change their mind, they can take it away and come put up a corrected sticky note. Or if they accidentally put their word form underneath the expanded notation, that's a problem they can quickly rectify by moving the sticky note. So great example here from third grade. Again, back to science with fourth grade. This is a huge, easy one. These forms of energy really, really translate well to word walls. So you can see students are using mechanical sound, electrical light, and heat energy. And they're drawing, and not only just making drawings, but they're clearly doing some claim as of evidence reasoning here. They're showing their thinking, and they're probably explaining why. Now let's take it to fifth grade. Looking now at fifth grade, We see PFL, personal financial literacy. This is definitely a TEK that lends itself very well to interactive word walls because personal financial literacy has huge vocabulary components. The concepts here do not really include a whole lot of calculation, especially not complex calculation. What really needs to happen is for students to understand the difference between gross and net income, right? And you can see here's income, that's kind of the umbrella, divided into gross and net. You have payments, that's the overarching theme, and that's divided into electronic, debit, credit card, check. So I really like the organization of this. As you can see, a lot of this is teacher created, but there definitely is some student interaction. And part of using interactive word walls in your classroom is how much control are you ready to cede to your students? This is not perfect, but it toes the line between teacher control and student input. I really like the fact that you can tell this teacher is somewhere along the line of moving toward giving up that control and letting students do a lot of the work. So, great example here. So, what's the difference between these interactive word walls and traditional word walls? Hopefully, you can tell by now. So, I want you to stop and talk to your group really quickly. What is the main difference? What are some of the main differences you see between these interactive word walls and the traditional word wall that we started at the beginning with the laminated words that were on colored paper? And now you can talk about some of those pictures you saw. What kind of content frames did you see? Which of those do you already use? Which would you like to learn more about? What other ones can you think of? Is there a anchor chart you've made before that could lend itself into being transformed into a word wall that students interact with more often? So let's take a few minutes. Just go ahead and pause the presentation and talk about that for a minute. So some of the things you might have noticed. The difference is that they are student created. That is a huge thing. That is a huge aspect of interactive word walls. That ownership over the classroom really makes students feel like they're a part of their learning. It makes the atmosphere in the class much more rich and visually inspiring. And that atmosphere of text in the class, a text-rich environment, it's going to have students be constantly aware that vocabulary and words are important. They're also aligned to the TEKs. You could see some of those worked on forms of energy, but you could see how they got more sophisticated as you move from kindergarten to third to fifth. The structure adds to the meaning. When you had the income as the overarching theme and then net and gross beneath, you can tell these are types, these are subcategories. The structure is based on a graphic organizer. And there are visual supports of realia. As often as you can, you want to bring in the real life object and actually bring that and put that onto your word wall if you can. Or the next best thing is to have a really good color picture. Why are they better? I'm sure you've noticed a difference by now. Why are interactive word walls better? They make the understanding of the content much more deep and rich. You're going to understand so much more because the vocabulary is no longer an impediment. It's now an entree into the learning. So learning these words are part of the learning. It's not something that's happening separately or something that's a stumbling block to the learning. There's a greater motivation for learning because kids want to contribute. They want to add their thoughts to the classroom consensus. And it shifts that classroom culture toward a community of enthusiastically engaged thinkers and learners. When kids are engaged, they behave better. Now, here are the 5 steps to creating an interactive word wall. In that brief video you saw by Dr. Jackson, it outlined these, and I'm going to go over them with you again. Read the TEKs. That's step number 1 is read the TEKs. You've got to be in touch with the TEKs to understand what's going on here. 85% of the academic vocabulary students need is within the language of the TEKS. So if you never give the kids an opportunity to use that kind of vocabulary, you're cheating them. And you're cheating yourself of the opportunity to share something really valuable with them. Read those TEKS and sketch a concept map. That concept map is your graphic organizer. So get an idea of what you want the layout to look like. Then you prepare a student activity sheet that mirrors the concept map. If you're going to do a Venn diagram for your interactive word wall, the students get a copy of that Venn diagram for their interactive student notebook. Then you build, step 3, build that word wall frame. Make it with painter's tape or with marker, or do it on a shower curtain, do it on a whiteboard, do it on a trifold, do it on anything that you can to go ahead and get it up there. Step number 4, teachers and students build the word wall during class. So you're explicitly teaching this topic, and as you're doing it, as you've learned it, you post up your learning on the wall, and the kids will contribute those ideas. You'll contribute some of those ideas, but together you're building this structure in your class. And as you're doing it, step number 5, students complete their activity sheets. They're filling out what's up on the wall. They're getting ideas that are self-generated, that are from people in their table, or that come from the word wall itself to fill out their interactive student notebook. So going back to the first step of making this plan, here's your 4-square plan. It's kind of squished down a little bit here so it'll fit in the screen. This comes from MF Graves, but I got it from Dr. Jackson and her website, where you can find it as well. You want to look in your TEKS and find a few well-selected words that you're going to teach directly. These are going to be your brick words, your important vocabulary words that need to be directly taught. Okay? Then we're going to talk about learning strategies. Are you going to use Greek and Latin roots? Are you going to use affixes like suffix and prefixes? Do you have multiple meaning words or cognates that you need to clarify? So you could have false cognates that you need to make sure you point out to your English language learners. You're going to provide rich and varied language experiences. That's how you're going to teach it. So you're going to do it through directly using the word wall, obviously. But what kind of vocabulary strategies, what kind of vocabulary games or enrichment ideas do you have? So that's going to be other things you collaborate with your team to come up with. And finally, fostering word consciousness is a big part of it. What are you going to do to make students know that vocabulary is a huge deal, that talking like a scholar is very important in their class? What are you going to do to constantly making kids have vocabulary on top of mind? So that is a really big deal here, fostering that word consciousness. You've got to show that talking like a scientist, talking like a mathematician, talking like an author is the most important thing. Talking like a scholar is something that is non-negotiable. So here's what one of those sheets look like when it is filled out. And I really like what they've done here. You can see, obviously, they're talking about Earth's surface and the changes that go on there, weathering, erosion, deposition. So these are the words that they have definitely selected from their TEKS that they know they're going to have to teach these explicitly. Then they look over here. This is what is really interesting to me, is that weather is a multiple meaning word. It could mean like precipitation, or is it sunny, but it could also mean whether or not I should, right? And then weather could also mean wearing down. So that's 3 meanings in one word. You need to teach that. Wind can be like air moving, or it can also be wind, like to turn and rotate. Change could be now things are different, or it could be change like make change, give me 4 quarters for $1. Erosion, they're going to teach that the root word, erode, deposit, constant. Those are the root words. So these are different word strategies that they're pre-planning. And that's the thing, is to pre-plan this, not try to come up with it on the fly. And here they're talking about word wall, and they're matching picture vocabulary game, and they're going to create a PowerPoint. They've got a lot of good thinking going on here. This pre-planning is the most important part of it, because it's going to get you in touch with your vocabulary and you in touch with your TEKS. and you need a solid understanding of the vocabulary that's upcoming and the concepts therein so that you can share that with your students effectively. So here's a little close-up of that, and you can see they've done a lot of thinking here. That's what I really like about that. So selecting a content frame, you can use the data chart, you can use the Venn diagram. A labeled drawing is a great one for a lot of different contexts. And then you can also go to this website, the Science Toolkit. This is Dr. Julie Jackson's site, and she has so many resources here. These are word wall labels that if you like things nice and neat and typed up, those are all there for you. Student organizers, these are by TEKS, and these are content frames. Some of them have been streamlined here. There's a whole bunch of those, and we don't like to endorse Teacher Pay Teacher very often, but in this case, it's all TEKS aligned, and it is mostly free, which she gives out here, and that is just another source of how to set up these word walls, because sometimes that can be the biggest impediment. Okay, I know the content I want to teach, but how exactly am I going to display it? So that'll help you get around that barrier. Now, let's talk about these word walls. So here you can see made a word wall with interdependent relationships, and it is organized like a data table, right? You got headings and columns and rows, and that's how it's organized. What is total physical response? It's just a way of teaching language by using movement to react to this verbal input. So it's the same way that babies learn language. It reduces student inhibitions and lower stress because you're being a little bit silly. You're being silly. You're kind of getting yourself out of your box for a little bit. It creates a brain link between speech and action to boost language and vocabulary learning. So here's what I suggest. Create a gesture, an action, or a sound effect for each category. So for example, back here when I said interdependent relationships, we say interdependent relationships and show our fingers interlocking each time to show that the relationship means two things that work together, right? You can also have a call and response synonym. So when I say organism, you say living thing. So the first organism, living thing that we're talking about, right? That kind of thing creates an automatic response in the brain. It links those words together. So that's really good. And then repeating this frequently, doing it systematically. Each time I say this word, you're going to say this word. Each time I say this word, you're going to do this. Each time I say gives, you're going to give this action. So it creates that link between movement and vocabulary learning. So that's TPR. That's going to get your word wall linked in to the brain. Now we want to be able to use this word wall. So we used it to learn vocabulary, but now we're going to use it to make writing. Okay? So how are we going to do that? Well, one of the resources is by Betsy Rupp Fulwiler called Writing in Science and Action. This is what it looks like, a spiral bound one. It's got a nice little DVD in there as well that's going to show you some classroom examples. There's an older version that's brown. Somewhere on your campus, they've got one of these, and it is a gold mine. It's really good. One of the things that I really love about this is when you're talking about graphic organizers, this is one of the first ones we go to, the good old Venn diagram. But what is the problem with the Venn diagram? The main drawback to the Venn diagram is this right here. The area where you are trying to contrast is very slim. It's very hard to get much in there. And so for my money, I would prefer this right here, the box and T chart. So instead of this Venn diagram where space is kind of limited, and you got these little wonky crescent moon shapes, over here you got the box and T chart. Everything that's the same or similar goes in this box, and all the differences go here. This is great because the similarities has better space, and the differences are not only given more space, but they are given an opportunity to oppose each other. And here's what I mean by that. My example right here with box and T-chart comparing, contrasting shells and turtles. Here's what they all have in common. They can be found on water or land. they have hard surfaces, all of that. But down here in the different part, where you have the T, you have to have bullets that correspond. So for every point that I put for the shells, I have to have a corresponding or counter argument basically for the turtles. So shells cannot move on its own. Turtles can walk or swim. And that is very important from what you're about to see next. This is called the butt line. And students will love to be given the permission to say but over and over again in class. And that kind of silliness also will help them remember that this line in the T-chart is the butt line. And whenever they encounter the butt line, they need to use a word, a conjunction like but, however, in contrast, whereas, instead, conversely, on the other hand. And they will compete to come up with examples of scholarly ways to contrast words. But you can see how this would work. You would say, the shell does not need air or food. However, the turtles must breathe through lungs and eat to survive. So that shows you right there how the butt line can be put into place. Here are those sentence stems that come again from Writing in Science and Action. The blank and the blank are similar because they both blank. In addition, they blank. That's comparing. Contrasting. The blank and the blank are different because the blank talks, but the blank cannot talk. Also, the shells cannot move on their own, whereas turtles can get up and walk around all day. All right, and then once you take that from the sentence stem, then you're gradually releasing. You may start out giving them sentence stems every time, and then after a while, they're going to be used to the pattern of that. And this is the writing that gets produced from that. And as you can see, this is really good quality academic writing that most teachers would be very pleased with. Now, if you go back to my chart of the cardinal, the cow, the egret, the interdependent relationships, these are sentence stems that you start with from there. The cow and the egret have an independent relationship. The cow depends on the egret for removing ticks. In turn, the cow provides insects for the egret to eat. Right? So you can see very easily how these would get plugged in. And there you go, looking at the sunflower and cardinal. The cardinal depends on the sunflower for food to survive. The sunflower provides food to the cardinal by growing seeds. In turn, the cardinal provides help to the sunflower by digesting the seeds and spreading them to new areas. I know I would love to see that from a student in my classroom. And this is all going to be produced just by the word wall and the use of sentence stems. Where do we find these sentence stems? Where do we find these sentence stems? Well, the first place I would look is in your Katy ISD unit plans. At the very bottom, this is what they look like. They're in transition, actually. This is what some of them look like, and some of them have been fixed up. But it's all going to be in a chart form, and it's all going to be down there. And you can see there are lots of sentence stems that are linked to the teaks and the ELPs. The ELPs are huge, a huge tool when we're talking about academic vocabulary and putting those into practice. Here are some more sentence stems. These again come from Dr. Daub, but it comes from Dr. Julie Jackson's website. And you can see for each kind of action they're trying to do, here's a sentence stem that might be applicable. These are some great other resources. Your campus ESL, ISST may have these. They may be in the library. And they have them for science, social studies, math, language arts, a lot of them. And they're produced by Seidlitz, which everybody knows. They're the kings of sentence stems, language acquisition, and all of that. Okay? And you can see here some examples. A characteristic of blank and blank is, so there's a similarity, right? The group has, so this is some classification. Classify this word or concept under the adjective category. The patterns have in common that they produce a life cycle. So these stems are super useful. And these sentence stems are super useful, but I don't want you to think that just because you're not working for the Silence Company, that you can't make something on your own that's just as useful. How can you create them? My suggestion is go to the TEKS, go to the academic language that students need, look at the TEKS, look at the ELPs, and that'll give you a great starting point for some really valuable sentence stems with the type of academic language that your students need. This is the final thought we want to leave you with. No matter what subject you teach, we are all language teachers. And our content areas are just media through which language is taught. So now we'd like to leave you with some reflection questions. And this would be a great time to share with your team, get together, spend some time, and think about the answers to these questions. What are some of the benefits of interactive word walls? We talked about it a lot, and you can pause it and take a couple minutes to talk about that. What resources do you have that you can use right away? And what additional resources do you need? So get a starting point, figure out, are there any barriers to you getting this started? If there are, knock them down, get them out of the way. See how your teammates can help you or how we in the district can help you. What seems like the most difficult aspect of putting these to work in your classroom? So not necessarily a resource related question, but what is the most difficult part? What do you anticipate coming up against that's going to hold you back? Talk with your team and figure out how to get around that. And the final discussion question, do you and your team or grade level or your whole school have some shared goals related to implementing interactive word walls? Do you have some type of vocabulary goal or a type of academic achievement goal for your students where using interactive word walls can be a step, can be part of the evidence that you put towards your T-test goals? So those are the questions. Hope you have a chance to discuss them with your group or with a partner, and have a great day. Thank you for joining us.